Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/The Rob Burgess Show. Over 250,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Hello and welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I am, of course, your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 25th episode, our guest is Marc Levin. But before we get to that, I need to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor. For you, the listeners of the Rob Burgess Show podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. I usually only recommend one book each episode, but this time I have three. Dark Alliance, The CIA, the Contras, and the Crack Cocaine Explosion by Gary Webb. The Killing Game, selected writings by the author of Dark Alliance, also by Gary Webb, and edited by his son, Eric Webb. And Kill the Messenger, How the CIA's Crack Cocaine Controversy Destroyed Journalist Gary Webb, by Nick Shue. Whatever book you pick, you can exchange it at any time, you can cancel at any time, and the books are yours to keep. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/The Rob Burgess Show. Again, that's audibletrial.com/The Rob Burgess Show for your free audiobook. Also, please make sure to comment, follow, like, subscribe, share, rate, and review everywhere the podcast is available. Whether it's iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Facebook, Twitter, Internet Archive, TuneIn, or RSS, you can find links to everything on the official website, www.therobburgessshow.com. You can also find out more about me by visiting my website, www.thisburgess.com. Back to today's show. Marc Levin is an award-winning independent filmmaker who brings narrative and verite techniques together in his feature films, television series, and documentaries. Among the many honors for his work, he has won the Grand Jury Prize at the Sundance Film Festival, the Camera d'Or at the Camera d'Or, 3 National Emmys, and 4 duPont-Columbia Awards. He is the director of such feature films as Slam, Whiteboyz, and Brooklyn Babylon, and documentary films such as CIA, America's Secret Warriors, Protocols of Zion, and most recently, Class Divide. He also directed the television series Brick City and Chicagoland, an episode of The Blues titled Godfathers and Sons, and 3 episodes of Law and Order. I first interviewed Marc and the subject of his documentary Freeway Crack in the System, Freeway Ricky Ross, last year. The film premiered on Al Jazeera America, and I was lucky enough to screen the film prior to its release. Here's the movie's trailer.
You know how they say that everybody has a purpose in life? Well, at one time I felt that selling cocaine was my purpose.
We were starving, just looking for a way to succeed.
The first time I seen rock cocaine was 1980.
Murder rate was sky high.
South of the 10 freeway was kind of a no man's land.
So, we're selling it to the blacks. So you go into these neighborhoods, there's no cops, you can sell it where you want, and when they start killing each other, nobody cares.
I was going through like $1 million worth of drugs just about every day.
That's like gold. We can make a fortune.
He was maybe the biggest guy in LA.
Rick, Freeway Rick.
Freeway Rick was getting his dope from a very big operator. I think we're into something that's bigger than us, something we really can't deal with.
They had been trafficking on behalf of the United States government.
She could prove what she was saying.
The story was mind-boggling.
When I was young, let me tell you how it was where I come from.
As I've said before, no drug network will remain alive.
There's a lot of people who think that, I made that whole thing up. What they don't realize is that the CIA admitted it.
See, I didn't know until I was sitting in prison how valuable an education was.
Yeah, drugs suck. Drugs are really bad. but the drug war is worse.
You want to know a version of hell? Be the only guy playing straight in a dirty card game. And that's what the drug war is.
There are more people in prisons and jails today just for drug offenses than were incarcerated for all reasons in 1980.
Me being here is defying all odds. People don't get federal life sentences and beat them.
We've been spending billions and billions and billions of dollars every year on this war on drugs to find out that the government was involved. That's pretty astonishing.
Crack in the system.
This is Los Angeles.
Even if the government just turned a blind eye and didn't do anything about it, then you have to start questioning the whole system.
I first became aware of the story of Freeway Ricky Ross in 2008 when it was revealed that not only was the rapper calling himself Rick Ross actually named William Roberts, but Roberts had also been a correctional officer in Florida. I then went on to read the late Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Gary Webb's seminal series Dark Alliance, in which he connected the dots between Ross, who was being supplied with cocaine by Nicaraguans raising money for the CIA-backed Contras through drug sales. Webb's life story was also told in the Jeremy Renner starring dramatic film Kill the Messenger, based on the book of the same name. July 21st, Levin's film, Freeway Crack in the System, was nominated for an Emmy Award in the Outstanding Investigative Journalism Long-Form category. The winners will be announced during the awards ceremony September 21st in New York City. And now on to the show.
Hello?
Hey, Mark, it's Rob.
Hey, Rob, how are you?
Oh, good. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Hold on. Let me just close the door here.
Okay.
Right. There we go.
Okay. First of all, congratulations on the Emmy nomination. That's huge.
Yes, it is. It was somewhat of a surprise, I have to admit, in that the television network Al Jazeera America doesn't even exist anymore.
Right, yeah, I saw that.
So, I was not aware that it had even been submitted for consideration, considering the network went down. But luckily it was. So, yeah, it was a great surprise.
Yeah, for sure. It looks like you got some pretty stiff competition from those Frontline episodes.
Yep,
yeah.
That's true. Frontline is I guess the king of long-form investigative documentaries. Mm-hmm. They've been doing it for years. In fact, I did a Frontline probably 30 years ago. Inside the jury. First jury deliberation ever recorded.
Really? Wow. Yeah. I didn't know that.
So, no, they are stiff competition, and it's a tremendous series.
Yeah, absolutely. Does it feel like old hat since you've already won Emmys before? I'm sure it's still exciting every time you get nominated for something like this.
Yeah, especially this one, since this was kind of a personal journey and against a lot of odds and a lot of crazy situations. It was very gratifying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of leads into what I wanted to talk about next. I mean, last time we talked, you kind of mentioned that this was a project, or you've really been working on this for 30 years now, and in some ways you, of course, were there for the Iran-Contra hearings, and you've been kind of following this for years and years. So does this feel like kind of tying that all together, finally?
Yeah, it is a great feeling of both vindication for not only this film but my interest in kind of how the war on drugs has impacted so many lives here and really the American experience. Some of the sources of it that haven't really been elucidated and examined. And, so it does. It feels like kind of coming full circle. Mm-hmm. And getting the validation for that is with just a nomination, is very gratifying. There's no doubt. And then, when you look at the political landscape, obviously there's been tremendous movement, not enough, as we saw with the DEA, kind of at least opening up to a little more medical marijuana research, but still the idea that it's still in this year of 2016 classified as a dangerous drug along with heroin and cocaine is insane.
Right.
So, and, look at the ballot coming up in November, in terms of recreational use of marijuana, especially in California, and then the movement to get rid of mandatory minimums or reconsider them, the clemency from the White House for a lot of nonviolent drug prisoners who are facing life behind bars. So, I feel that in many ways there's a mainstreaming of the simple idea that the war on drugs is a disaster, a failure. It's time to move on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and if you want to even take it from if you're a conservative person, this is just a giant waste of talent and money and resources. So if you even want to look at it from the other side of the political spectrum, there's that argument to be made too. There's people like Ron Paul that are even talking about that on the right. So it's not just a left-right thing. I think it kind of cuts across the political spectrum now, hopefully. So
I think you're absolutely right. In fact, if you saw Morning Joe yesterday, there was a gentleman on that I've kind of been talking to, Weldon Angelos, who was got out because of the president's intervention, but was busted for a small amount of marijuana and got an insane sentence. It was involved in the hip hop world with some of the characters actually we dealt with on Freeway Soup and some of the other characters, and he's teamed up with the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers their foundation was part of championing his case, and others, like you say, that it's an unusual alliance of the ACLU and the Koch brothers foundation, and Ron Paul and Cory Booker. So that all of that, is feels like, wow, this, as a child of the '60s, that finally 40 years later we're finally coming to our senses. But I still think that the value of Freeway and certainly the validation just of the nomination, especially in this category, which is a very prestigious, investigative journalism.
Oh yeah,
is that the real story or part of the story, key parts of it, still are not fully known or understood. And even in this campaign, we've seen like the Black Lives Matter movement certainly, raise the issue of the Clinton administration in the 90s, and some of their contribution to mass incarceration, which is definitely true.
Right.
But that was the cherry on the cake. That was not the source. You got to go back to, where we went back to really the Reagan administration's escalation and kind of putting the whole war on drugs on steroids.
Oh, yeah.
And the alliances made then. That's where the mandatory minimums started. That's where the crack cocaine disparity and panic started. So, Clinton just kind of went along with that, with the crime bill. But that's not how it started. That's not how it blew up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, if anything, Clinton was just kind of, whatever they say, triangulating, trying to take the, conservative position before it could be used against him in that way. It's like, you're not going to call me soft on crime. I'll be just as hard as everyone else.
Exactly. And that's why, it's been interesting. I mean, we had screened the film up in Harlem at the Maysville Center, brought it down to Selma, screened it at various places. And one of the interesting things was some of the young activists kind of, wow, they didn't fully know the story. And it was an eye-opener. And so I think in that sense, going back to your original question, this validation, gives the film a kind of timelessness. you know, so that it can now be, you know, whatever happens in terms of who wins, it can now be looked back on as, you know, you want to understand these last 30 or 40 years, this whole war on drugs, this mass incarceration, this kind of declaring war on our own people. You need to understand this story.
Yeah.
It is one of, I guess, what I would call kind of the fundamental stories of that era.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, you know, you go back to Gary Webb's reporting, and he was seen as such an outlier when he first kind of brought all these things to the light. But, you know, now it's like, you even talk about this in the film a little bit. You have a clip of him talking about this. You know, the CIA, by their own admission, even said it was worse than he even said it was, you know. So it was like he was even understating how much they had in it. So it's like now it's just kind of seen as, you know, he was right. I mean, maybe you could quibble with, you know, he didn't do this or that in the original Dark Alliance series, but his main point was more than correct, and we see that today. So I think that's very prescient. So.
Absolutely. Look, you know, I hope this helps, you know, keep Gary's memory alive, keep his work alive, because whatever minor flaws there might be in Dark Alliance, I think it's a seminal work that anybody interested in this era and in understanding it, you know, needs to read. You know, as I told you originally, I knew Gary, not well, but knew him, respected him, liked the time I spent with him, and felt, you know, just devastated about his death. And, you know, I think that part of the motivation was, you know, somewhere that somebody's got to kind of come back and tell the story that he told and got condemned for and re-litigated. You know, I wrote a blog, I think, after the Washington Post came out, you know, just trying to, when Kill the Messenger came out. So, yeah, no, I think Gary was way ahead of on this story and deserves tremendous credit. And, you know, now, like you just said, we see a mainstreaming from left, right, you know, from all positions. That no one is even defending this thing anymore.
Right.
It's much more how we make a transition. And the other thing is, I think in the world we're now in, the war on terror has obviously kind of replaced the war on drugs.
Another war on a noun. So.
Exactly, another war on a noun. That's a good one. And I think that one thing we've come to see clear in the war on terror is that when you make alliances, like that's part of the madness of, you know, fighting ISIS, the Syrian civil war, the Iraqi situation. You know, you're dealing with some very nefarious characters, and the blowback is something that can't be ignored. And now we're just a little more aware. We're less naive than the idea that, oh my God, we're dealing with, you know, drug dealers and drug trafficante, and you know, the Medellin cartel and the Cali cartel, and that's impossible. Well, you know, our battle was the Cold War and anti-communism and whoever, you know, kind of fit those credentials. We overlooked a lot more, but we were naive. No, we would never do that. We would never be in bed with people like that. Now, I think there's a sober, more realistic look that, my God, sometimes we do have to ally ourselves with people that really you know, are unsavory, but they're the enemy of our enemies. But we're a little more realistic about it, although still trying to figure out the blowback because, you know, Al-Qaeda itself was, you know, the Mujahideen. I mean, if you think about it, you know, that goes back to the Reagan era also, the war on drugs also, in terms of the opium coming out of Southeast Asia, and our support for bin Laden and some of these jihadists, because the enemy then was the Soviet Union.
Right. It was just a different, you know, we were like, oh, you can help us with this other guy. Oh, well, that other guy's gone. Now you're the enemy.
Exactly. And look, that's part of the real world. I think we're more realistic about that now. You know? But is still unwilling to understand kind of how we helped create and facilitate, this kind of drug war, and just the flow of drugs into this country.
Right. Well, I don't know if you've seen that Netflix series Narcos, I assume.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Of course.
The thing that struck me with that was it's like, yes, you can kind of focus in on this one story, but if you think about it, if he wasn't there, there would have just been someone else that would have served that same need. So the underlying problem really doesn't change. The demand for these drugs from America during the height of the drug war is still so high. It's like, you can take this one guy down, but it's not like people in Miami are going to stop wanting cocaine. So it's
exactly.
like you still have the underlying problems. So
exactly, and that's what's so fascinating about the drug war, the drug business. The drug culture is in many ways, since it's black market, it's illegal, it's underground, it's a kind of pure distillation of how kind of, I guess what you would call primitive capitalism works. Right. Pirate capitalism.
Yeah.
Is this is it. And it's the perfect product because you always need more. In other words, the consumer and the consumer fever that, the global economy, the so-called capitalist consumer global economy feeds on, is that we need to, buy consumer goods.
Yeah.
It's all fine and well if people can at least make a wage to afford them. But the planned obsolescence that goes in other words, that, hey, your iPhone is done now, don't get it fixed, buy something new. That is so built into the whole marketing and the psychology of our culture that more, new, higher. And so addiction, you could say, in that sense, is like kind of the social disease of advanced capitalism. Because you're basically acting out the very ethos of I need more. Yeah. I need to get higher. I need more.
Exactly.
And then you see, kind of the power that it's had. So it's fascinating. There's no doubt about it. And then the scary thing is, if we keep it illegal, is we force that side of the underground economy and the criminal economy into the arms of the terror world.
Yeah, precisely.
And that's a very scary, concept of them teaming up as they have in certain places, working together. So that's why it is interesting to see this realignment on both right and left kind of reevaluating, our whole approach to the war on drugs.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, actually, it's funny you say that because a few weeks ago I actually interviewed a guy named Jeff Smith who I don't know if you've seen this documentary. It was from 2006. It was called Can Mr. Smith Get to Washington Anymore? I don't know if you've seen that one.
I've not seen that.
Okay. He was a Missouri politician. He was trying to get elected to the Congress, and he narrowly failed. But anyway, he got caught up in an obstruction of justice case, and he eventually went to prison for a year, and he wrote a book called Mr. Smith Goes to Prison. Anyway, he talked a little bit about exactly what you're saying. When he was in prison, he kind of observed this very pure form of capitalism, and he was saying, the people that were in prison in this underground economy, they're using all the same, things that a legitimate business would use, but they're just not using the same names for it. It's like, he was saying Adam Smith would be so proud, because it's like there's there's product testing, there's launch, there's rollout, all this kind of stuff that you in the straight business world, but it's been, like you said, shoved into this underground economy, and it's not like the need for it goes away. It just, the same business principles just apply in a more, underground way. So.
Well, that makes me think of another thing. Mike Morenga, who's a producer on Freeway, has been involved with the NDoubleACP in a whole new campaign which comes out of this realignment, which is to advocate for and lobby for African Americans to be given an opportunity in the legal cannabis business. Because the position being that so many young African American males obviously have been imprisoned over the last 30 years in the war on drugs, for these extremely long sentences. And here we are on kind of the verge of legalizing marijuana recreationally. It's already Colorado and Washington, and now if obviously California goes in November, that's huge. Yeah. And Mike is working, as I said, with the NAACP, saying, the legal cannabis business, both medical and recreational, is all white. And where are the African American items? And give us a shot. So that's an interesting element. And then, of course, the mass incarceration element that the war on drugs was such a big driver behind, filling our prisons, stripping urban communities of so many young, talented people who may, well have made mistakes. But the years that we've put away, the millions and millions that we've spent just locking people up, it's such a waste of human capital, and has only exacerbated the collapse of our inner city communities, the increased alienation between the citizens of color and law enforcement, that we see being acted out in the last, few years, and the videos of cops shooting black men and then people shooting cops, and the militarization of our police, and the occupation of inner city communities, and obviously, as is mentioned in Freeway, there's that scene where the man says, a lot of reputable African-American leaders supported the war on drugs and were major advocates for some of the harsh sentences, etc. But now we've come to realize that drugs are bad, but the war on drugs is worse. Yeah. And the devastation it's caused, and the waste, in this punitive approach instead of the public health approach. So, on all those levels, the nomination is just a stamp of approval and legitimacy, and again, because it's investigative journalism, credibility, that here's something that, as we move forward, try to figure out how to get out of that one, and try to understand how the hell we ever got into it. Hopefully, this will be one of the significant films, documentaries that people refer to and look at.
Well, I think it'll definitely be proven that way. That's something else I wanted to ask you about, because I feel like a lot of times with documentary film, there is maybe a blurring of the line between, there's this idea of quote-unquote objective journalism, and of course, talking to you, I know you have a point of view, but you're still basing this on facts and the research you've done and all that. Do you think that there's I don't know how to say it exactly, but a line between pure journalism and documentary film, because I do feel like that there is a little bit of a difference between the two sometimes. I know that sometimes it can just be, presenting facts, but there is this idea of, the presenter has to be objective and they can't have a point of view, but that seems like a little bit of a construct to me in some ways. So.
I agree. The he said, she said, which I would call faux objectivity, and, certainly apparent when, you start seeing people trying to do that in the presidential campaign with, Trump said this bad thing or lied like this, but Hillary did this, and trying to create an equivalency because you've got to be so-called objective. I don't think that's objective. That's faux objectivity. That's a fraud. I think, look, there are many forms of journalism, just as there are many forms of documentary. The powerful form of journalism is certainly comes out of when, again, I came of age, this more personal personalized novelistic nonfiction that Truman Capote and Norman Mailer and Tom Wolfe, kind of bringing the novels tools to nonfiction, and that you could report, but not in a just he said, she said way, and that facts are certainly important, but how to frame those facts, how to give it a point of view, doesn't take away. If anything, it can make it more compelling, more powerful, more relatable.
Right.
And that's new journalism, and I feel that is totally valid from gonzo journalism of Hunter Thompson right to Frank Rich today or other journalists, but who are giving you a point of view. But it's they're not ignoring facts like Fox News, which pretends to be objective, which is a joke. And then in the documentary world, this is such a golden age of documentaries. Documentaries now span every form, from the hybrids like the Jinx to the Making of the Murderer, or the ESPN series on OJ, which uses that as a way of looking at the much larger issues of race in America. I think that documentary form has been liberated, and in many ways has been thrust into the limelight because of some of the collapse of print journalism, and because the movie business really has moved into kind of the video game superhero genre, and it's left kind of more serious, character-driven, issue-oriented storytelling to both serial TV and documentaries. In other words, how do you synthesize all this information? Where we live, we're overwhelmed. We live in a society where you're just overwhelmed with information. How do you curate it? How do you synthesize it, all this information and facts, into something that resembles knowledge? And some sense of wisdom, or what does it all mean?
Right.
And to do that, you have to have an interpretive element. So I think that this is that documentaries are no longer just kind of limited to a reporter saying, we're going to give you this side of the war on drugs, and now we're going to go over to the other side and tell you, why drugs are so bad, or this is your brain on drugs, and just kind of walking you back and forth, but never really digging in and trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Hunter Thompson, because one of my favorite quotes from him is, if you want objective journalism, the box scores are about the best place you can look, and then everywhere else, you don't look for it anywhere else, because that's the pure information, and then everywhere else is a point of view. Even if they don't say point of view, everything else has a point of view, whether they announce it or not. So, I definitely agree with that. So you screened this at Selma, right? During the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, right?
Right.
How was that received? I have to imagine that was a pretty poignant moment there on the Edmund Pettus Bridge that I saw you taking a picture there. So. Yeah,
that was very powerful. Just to be there, really,
right.
And to think. Of this kind of struggle. I guess it struck a personal nerve in me, in that as a kid, really, my parents brought me to the March on Washington.
Oh, wow.
And as I say, I was just a kid, but to kind of try to close my eyes and think back to that hot day where my parents dragged myself and my sisters down to, that famous moment in Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream, and here, all these years later, and kind of just thinking about both the grand picture of that progress has been made. It is incredible. I never thought I would live to see an African American president, I have to admit.
Right.
But then also thinking on the personal level of those who've gone down and sacrificed, and just like the 3 civil rights workers, that Cheney Goodman and my mother was very close friends with Carolyn Goodman, who was the mother of one of those who was tortured and killed. But so many others, just whether it's drug overdoses, people sent away in prison for years. So it was poignant. It was poignant to just be in the midst of all of that, and it was. Again, I was glad the film kind of just led me in that direction.
Right, absolutely. Now, you mentioned Cory Booker a little bit, and you, of course, directed the series Brick City. He's, of course, his political star has only risen since then. I have to imagine you probably saw that coming, just based on the adroitness he kind of, had in your documentary there. What's it been like to watch him kind of rise up the political ranks here?
Well, I have to say, when I saw the Democratic convention in his speech, I guess it was either Monday or Tuesday, I was just emailing a number of people. I mean, the first part of it, I thought, there's Cory, he's doing his thing, and then it was almost like he lifted off. Yeah. He blasted off for like the last part of it. The guy was like, just a rocket ship. Yeah. And was going back and forth with a number of people. Like, my God, he's lighting the sky up, and is he going to run for president? Yeah. And no, he's a bright star. Of course, then Michelle Obama came on, and she eclipsed everything. I mean, she wiped the floor with everyone at that point. She was just unbelievable. Yeah, absolutely. So, superstar. But yeah, Cory is it's fascinating to watch and to see. I think he has a lot to offer. It's one of the interesting things is how he's made this issue. The war on drugs, mass incarceration, criminal justice reform. This has been at the center of his short time in the Senate, but I think it's shaped by what he witnessed as mayor of Brick City, Newark, and seeing the devastation that drugs, both the drug trade, the gang scene, the violence, the black-on-black violence, and then at the same time the criminal justice system, how broken it is, and how they kind of feed each other. And he knows it. I mean, his house, where he lived when he was mayor, was like right in the hood. So he saw it. And, it's great that there is somebody that knows first person, like he does, that at least is part of this discussion, part of this debate. I often think back to 2008. I was with Cory when Obama was elected, and that was just such an epic moment, unforgettable moment. It was amazing that I just happened to be with him, that evening. No, we're still in touch, and I think certainly if Hillary gets elected, I would certainly look for Cory to, be playing even a larger role. Oh yeah. In terms of both a future administration and just as a senator. So. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, to kind of bring it back to mass incarceration a little bit, I don't know if have you read that report from the Mother Jones reporter who went undercover working at a private prison here recently? Is that the one where private prisons have more problems, more violence? I saw the headline. I haven't read it yet, but again, and I want to read it. Oh yeah, because that goes to the heart of I think this whole question of privatization. This goes to the foundation of the Republican myth that the marketplace is the answer for everything, and that we don't need government,
right.
and that the profit motive can substitute. And it's insanity. It's insanity when it comes to education. It's insanity when it comes to health care. And it's insanity when it comes to criminal justice. That you're putting the profit motive as the driver, and you think it's going to deliver justice or health or education. So I do want to read that.
Oh, yeah.
But I just wish, when I hear this mantra repeated over and over again, we don't need government, we don't need government regulations, we don't need government programs, we don't need government to do anything. And then you see what happens. And look, I'm a small business person, so you don't have to preach to me about entrepreneurship, about being independent, about hating bureaucracies, whether it's government bureaucracies or corporate bureaucracies. I'm a true believer. But the need for regulations that give you the rules of the game, and the need for certain areas of our life not to be driven by the profit motive and the marketplace, but by the idea of service, by the idea of helping people or protecting people or keeping people safe. You have to save some part of what I would call the common ground, the common good, the commons, that citizens agree we all collectively are responsible for, and it's not just a business. So I want to read that, but I feel just from the little I've seen, it confirms the critique that the marketplace is certainly not the answer when it comes to our prison issues.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Tying the profit motive to things like that, and in the Mother Jones piece, he talks a little bit about how these private prisons actually get to charge the government extra if these cells aren't filled. So it's like they view these prisoners not as prisoners but as customers, and if they don't have enough customers, then they have to make up their profit margins elsewhere. And it's like, well, is this really about keeping people safe, or is this just about filling the prisons because you have a quota to fill? So
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's look, again, there are millions of regulations that are probably outdated, and government needs to be streamlined and made more efficient and made more entrepreneurial and less bureaucratic, as does corporate America.
Right.
The same thing. But to confuse that with and to not educate and kind of have a culture that reinforces that there's something noble about public service, civil service, working, whether it's as a corrections officer or as a teacher or as a healthcare worker, that there's something noble about helping people, keeping people safe, trying to rehabilitate people, and that it's not just all fame and fortune and celebrity.
Right.
So that I want to take a look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to kind of shift gears a little bit, I know you also directed Chicagoland, and Chicago has just seen so much gun violence, and I live in Indiana, and I know we've been kind of implicated as far as we kind of supply a lot of the guns for that crisis. We have pretty lax gun laws compared to Chicago, and people just bring them across here. After making that documentary, what solutions do you see to that crisis that's happening in Chicago with all the violence? People point to black on black crime, but then of course you've got problems with the police in Chicago, as we've all seen from the videos that have come out. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, let me say that this year has been, you brought up Chicagoland and then Brick City both. One of the sad things, and it just shows you how close and how real this is two of the main characters. One of the main characters in Brick City, Creep, who was part of the Jada Creep kind of Romeo and Juliet couple. And then Lee McCullum in Chicagoland, who went to Finger High and was somebody that Liz Dozier, the main character, was very close to. both Creep and Lee were killed. Both of them by guns. Creep was shot and killed on the street and still unsolved, and Lee was shot and killed on the street.
Wow.
Still unsolved. And at the funeral of Creep, couldn't help feeling that I wasn't just a journalist or a filmmaker or a film director anymore. I was a friend, a colleague, and it was just thinking about other people I saw there, and Jada and the kids, how many funerals they've gone to, and how much a part of their life, this ritual of death is. It's incredibly sobering, and it's difficult to fathom because both of them had tremendous potential. Both of them had a variety of opportunities to try to move on, people helping them and at least reaching out and offering a hand. And yet, when things go wrong and times get tough, it's just hard to comprehend the pull back into the hood and into the street where, for all the threats and danger, I guess there's some sense of knowing who you are and that you're still a man, maybe in your own eyes. I mean, I also have been working a bit with Jeff Hobbs, who's the author of the book, The Short and Tragic Life of Robert Peace, which is quite a powerful book about a young man from Newark who had tremendous talent and got a scholarship to Yale, but had a secret street life and ended up getting shot and killed also right outside Newark. So it's so complicated how I mean, I think the gun thing is, insane. I mean, that this idea that, the only way to, deal with a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And that is very much the irony. That's the NRA mantra. The irony is that is the mantra of gang life. That is very much the mantra of growing up in the hood, which is I'd rather go away for 5 years getting caught with a gun than be buried 6 feet under. And if I don't have my gat on me, look what happened to Creep. Look what happened to Lee.
Right.
It's not going to happen to me. So that's the irony, is that even if the guns are illegal, purchased coming over from Indiana, wherever, they buy into the same attitude that forget the police, forget everybody. It's a vigilante justice, and we got one of them. They're coming after us. I got to have my gun at all times. And if some innocent people are killed, bystanders are in the crossfire, so be it. So there's so many levels, from the gun issue to the mental health issue of growing up in communities where they're dealing with what they call toxic stress, which was very much Fenger High School, where over half the students were homeless. So I mean, you're coming to school, you're not even sure where you're going to sleep. You're not even sure, you're going to have another meal. You basically, getting your food from the school cafeteria. It's hard to think about studying and focusing on your education when you're not sure you're going to be able to walk home and whether you're going to get shot or not, because you got to cross some gang territory. And you saw a friend of yours shot down. So that toxic stress actually changes the brain, and it actually affects decision making. So there's the mental health issue. There's the education, poverty. It's so multi-leveled. But the idea of arming everybody on top of that. And I mean, I remember, even letting terrorists get guns. I mean, this is insanity, and we can't even, we cannot even deal with that, and that was like 3 months ago.
Right.
Trump was going to sit down with the NRA. Yeah, whatever happened on that one after Orlando, and we've got to close the loophole so people on the terrorist watch list can't buy guns, and they still can. And even in the ISIS magazine, they say, we haven't been able to penetrate the U.S. with ourselves and our facilitators, but we don't really have to because America's crazy. Anybody can buy a military weapon.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you create this toxic environment, and then you throw all these guns in. And it doesn't mean there wouldn't be violence or that people couldn't use bats or knives or their fists, but still, when you give them automatic weapons, the gun madness is frightening, and Chicago is an example of it. But there's a culture. There's both a culture in the hood. There's a culture with the police, like that you've brought up, and now we're all aware of, where it's basically a war. It's not protect and serve. All of that has kind of somehow, Chicago has also embraced as part of its own history. The gangster mentality is very much just a part of kind of the Chicago identity, from Al Capone on, that there is this kind of outlaw gangster, sensibility somehow in the water there. So it's daunting, but I think and it's very segregated. One of the most segregated big cities, in the country, the South Side and the West Side, just totally separated from downtown in the north. But I think New York and L.A. have shown that you can turn these things around. When you think of where New York was at in '90, with over 2,000 murders a year, the peak of the crack era, going back to Freeway and the film and the violence that did come out of the crack era, both the gang violence and drug violence and the militarizing of our police. You see a tremendous turnaround in New York. You see Los Angeles, which was, kind of totally out of control. It's police culture has to be changed, and that's not easy. That's easier said than done. And part of doing Chicagoland, Gary McCarthy went down because of the video and because of some of the misbehavior of the Chicago police. But I know Gary, from Brick City and Newark, and then followed him to Chicago, and I feel that he kind of became a fall guy, for the mayor, and that whatever mistakes were made, I think that what Gary was in that classic place between a rock and a hard place in terms of when you start trying to change the police, there's tremendous resistance within the rank and file, and you've got the union you're dealing with, and your management, and you want the rank and file, officers and the detectives, you want them on your side, and they do deserve, a good wage and to make a good living, putting their life on the line. And you're always afraid you push too far in terms of pushing forward and you're kind of de-escalating some of the militaristic tactics, that you might lose them, and they'll turn on you. So it's a tricky, tough line, how to reform law enforcement, which is a huge issue today. Huge issue. And I think going back to the war on drugs, that's key in this ingredient, because so much resources has been spent on kind of picking up small-time drug dealers. And there's a lot of violence in the drug trade. There's no doubt about it. That, if we could get that off to the side so we could focus, so that if drugs were legal, and it's more of a public health crisis, just as nicotine is and alcohol is, which we all know can be abused and be incredibly destructive. But there's not an underground economy that we have spent so much resources and so much violence comes out of. Then to be able to focus on both the community policing of establishing real relationships in the community, knowing your community, focusing on violent crime, it runs deep. And I think that just emerging from, going back to where we started, this idea that the war on drugs, was kind of the primary driver of law enforcement, which really in the 80s started, and it was the primary funder, which go together. That this is where we got our money. This is where we get our equipment. This is where we get our, our tanks, our, this military equipment. So we know that is a fundamental crisis we're facing now, how to reform law enforcement, how to make it so that the community sees it as protecting and serving and not as being occupied and at war with it. And in Chicago, that is a real challenge when you look at the history of torture, racism, bossism, corruption. So Gary had a huge challenge. I feel bad that this tragedy happened on his watch. I don't really know, kind of the inside story of how it unfolded. We were already out of town. What I will say about Chicagoland is we got a lot of flack for focusing on the violence, on the South and the West Side, and, why don't you tell all the great stories? And we, obviously tried to mix it up with a lot of what makes Chicago so unique, so special. But we were criticized. Oh, you guys are just, down there in Finger High and the gangs and the shootings and, Chicago's so much more than that. And then I look at the 2 years since we did that.
You've just been proven more and more, right?
Yeah, exactly. Everything we focused on. And, of course, education and the battle over, the future of public education in Chicago also. Those were the two main issues, and they were interrelated, obviously. And they've just exploded. And I feel if the mayor, is listen, the guy's a bright guy, and he's got some great ideas, and he's a doer. He makes things happen, but he's also got an arrogance and can be abusive in the way he treats other people. And the whole attitude he and his team had, we don't need to listen to you guys, and you're some out of towners, and just shut up and basically here's what you should do, just follow our line. And had he listened closer, not just to what the characters in Chicagoland were saying, but what the citizens in Chicago were saying, he might have avoided the explosion that happened with the video and with the position he's in now.
Right.
So it's we weren't looking for vindication, and of course Liz Dozier is going on to start a whole foundation and try to take some of what she learned in terms of public education, on a national level, to find best practices around the country, highlight them, amplify them. But I feel we were vindicated in terms of our focus, and obviously the tragic death of Lee only underscored that, and the pain of that. But when you ask about solutions, there's no snapping of the finger, but certainly, having an elite, whether it's the business elite, the political elite, that listens and really is responsive, and is not, even sometimes when the elite have the right ideas, the technocratic solutions.
Right.
If you don't listen and you don't understand and work with the actual people on the front line, and this is very much the point of that book that's gotten a lot of attention on the future of public education, and which looked at the whole Newark experience, is that top-down can be doomed, even when it has some of the right answers.
Right.
If you just force feed them to the citizenry without their participation, without their buy-in, without them sensing that you feel them, it can collapse, even if it was the right idea.
Right.
And that was a huge problem in Chicago.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I've interviewed a former Baltimore police officer named Michael Wood, and he's talked a lot about how what we need to do going forward is it has to be the citizenry telling the police what they want as opposed to the other direction, because it's exactly what you're talking about. It's, it's a lot about the posture of the police, and it's like, maybe what they're saying is right, but the way they do it is so authoritarian and top down that it's, people are resistant to it, whereas, if it's a conversation and people feel like they're being listened to or respected in that way, and especially with the militarization, it's like you roll down the street in a Bearcat or an MRAP, it doesn't feel like protect and serve. It feels like you're the enemy and we're out to destroy the enemy. You know what I mean? So it's very much, it's a, optics kind of thing more than anything. I feel like sometimes, even if it's the right idea, it's like you're going about it in such an authoritarian way that people who might listen to you otherwise aren't going to listen. So.
Exactly.
But well, to bring it to a more fun place, you worked on the series The Blues, and I know that was done by Martin Scorsese, who's absolutely one of my favorite directors. So, what was it like to work with him?
Oh, that was a kick. I mean, in terms of Marty, it was just great that he appreciated and kind of. I think the high point in just our interchange was his voicemail that he left me on when he saw the rough cut, and he just got it,
right,
and just so enjoyed it, and just his effusiveness, and the guy's so passionate.
Oh yeah.
That was sensational. But the lasting relationship was with Marshall Chess. He became a friend. His family.
Cool.
And just to get plugged into the Chess family and the Chess legacy, and that's still very much, because it was Paul Butterfield that really, as a teenager, for me, as a 13-year-old kid, that's kind of what got me, opened my eyes to, where the Beatles and the Stones and Clapton, where they were all getting their music, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf. That was my awakening as a kid. It was the Chicago blues that opened me up.
Right.
So that's still very much part of just me closing my eyes and putting on headphones. And that was one of the most fun projects. I have another one that's been a lot of fun that is going to come out on October 3rd and is just played on Martha's Vineyard on Friday and will be in Chicago. Actually, you could see it.
Oh, cool.
Next Tuesday or Wednesday. I think it's going to be at the Black Harvest Film Festival.
Oh, awesome.
I'll get you the details. It's called Class Divide.
Oh, cool.
And it's about kind of the hypergentrification, class inequality, mobility, all these issues, some of which we've been talking about, but is seen through the eyes of kids on two sides of one street corner in Chelsea, Manhattan. Not far from, I'm looking out the window here on 26th Street. It's right on the corner of 26th and 10th Avenue, and on one side of the street you have one of New York's newest elite private schools called Avenues, the World School. A lot of, very privileged kids there. And then right across the street is the public housing, the Elliott Chelsea projects. So you got kids from the projects and kids from, one of the most elite schools. And the neighborhood of West Chelsea, where I'm sitting right now, is like the fastest, they're calling it hypergentrification. The changes here, the High Line has kind of catalyzed this unbelievable changing of this neighborhood. So it's all about how these kids from two sides of the street see each other and see this neighborhood, which is just changing so fast right in front of their face. And the common ground between the two sides and the kids from both sides is the anxiety about where they fit in to, this fast-changing world. So that will be on HBO October 3rd.
Oh, very cool.
And we could get you a screening copy, but it will also be Daphne, the producer, and one of the kids that's in it, Hashim, will be at the Chicago screening, I think it's next Tuesday or Wednesday.
Oh, awesome. Well, I can't wait to see that. That's awesome. Another thing I know that you're executive producing that I can't wait to see because I have a 2-year-old is the movie Monkey Business about the creators of Curious George. And I read an interview with the director, and I was just blown away by the story that the creators of Curious George, like, they constructed their own bicycles to escape Nazi Germany, or Nazi France, rather.
Right.
Yeah, just amazing.
It's a fantastic story. Emma, who was the editor on Class Divide, and who we really started working with on Chicagoland.
Okay.
One of the editors on Chicagoland. This is her directorial debut, and it's a tremendous story. I have to admit, obviously, we all know Curious George, but I had no idea what the backstory was, and it really is an eye-opener. It's a great human story, and I'm very excited about that project.
Cool. Well, I absolutely can't wait to see that. Well, I've taken up a lot of your time here, but one more thing before we go. What music have you been listening to lately? We always talk about music a little bit.
That is a good question. What have I been listening to lately? It's funny. What I like to do is I have not changed my app, my iTunes app, or whatever it is here, because I like to put it on random.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because there's just something about the free association. So I've been listening. In terms of new, I like Paul Simon's album a lot, and this song "Wristband" I think is a classic.
Okay.
In fact, I was disappointed he didn't sing that at the Democratic convention. He tried to sing "Bridge Over Troubled Waters." His voice is shot. But this song "Wristband" is just so much about all these issues. It's about feeling that you're not part of the elite. You're not part of the VIP crowd, and it's just a great hook. It's a great song. So I've kind of gotten into his album. Been listening to the new Dylan album. Love world music. So kind of constantly dipping into African music. Mali. You talked about the Godfathers and Sons. Kind of that whole series that Marty oversaw got me into listening to a lot of music from Mali, which is West African nation where a lot of the blues ideas came from.
Right.
So that's something. And then in terms of just really going back, I've been listening to an Egyptian singer named Katoum, who is the Billie Holiday of the Mideast.
Wow.
And who I first got turned on to when I was a kid and spent some time in the Middle East in the early 70s.
Oh, wow.
And kind of rediscovered that.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time here, and I'll let you know when the episode's out, and I can't wait to see what you're working on next. So let's talk again sometime.
Okay, Rob, I appreciate all you're doing, and let's stay in touch, okay?
Absolutely.
And let me know if you want on Class Divide, we can get you the info. So just send me an email, and I'll send you the details, or Kara will, on the screening in Chicago next week, and if you can't make that, we could get you a link, too.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
You got it.
All right, bye.
Take care.